Good morning. My name is Alia Azariah. I am the director of aftercare for Safe House Project. I'm also a survivor leader in this space. And it's my role within Safe House Project to be a liaison between our programs that we have internally with Safe House Project and the rest of the anti-trafficking field, and be able to just support you all as boots on the ground direct service workers who are working every day with survivors, and how can we as an organization continue to contribute to the work that you're doing and walk alongside you as you serve survivors on the front lines every day, as Laura does, who's here as well. Today we're talking about breaking down barriers in placements. Feels a little bit like a tongue twister to do that, and excited that you all are here to join us. This webinar is going to be for an hour, and I am really excited to introduce you all to Laura. I'm sure many of you probably have had the opportunity to work with Laura over the last year or so. If you've had a conversation with me about our placements team before, I'm sure you've heard me sing Laura's praises. For me, Laura is my favorite person on the team. One, because she's wonderful, but also because I used to have Laura's role, or what Laura does used to be a part of my role. And it was the most difficult thing that I did in my Safe House Project role. And when I was in this role, we served less than 100 survivors through placements a year. And within the first year that Laura took over, she served over 500 survivors through placement options. And I think that's just like a testament to how well she was doing the role, that she was able to grow it by 500% and support 500% more survivors through that role. To me, just shows that she is so much better at it than I ever was. And just when you get the right people with the right skill set in the right role, you can really see that by the way that it affects the survivors that you serve as an organization. And last year we served 534 survivors through placements. This year we're hoping to serve 1,500 survivors through placements. We've grown our placement team as an organization, but somewhere that we've really situated ourselves throughout the years is how do we support those survivors that come from a demographic or that have a specialized need that traditionally has been underserved in finding appropriate placement and housing solution. And so that's something that Laura has spent the last year and a half, 2 years really diligently working towards, and something that when I get on conversations around grants or around certification or trainings, that I hear from you guys as people who are boots on the ground, consistently still finding barriers around, still really struggling to understand, like, how do I place a minor out of state? How do I place somebody who has a service animal? How do I find these opportunities? And so I really wanted to bring Laura to the forefront of these conversations, where you all can really hear from her how you can take that to clients that you're serving, either an outreach capacity, in a case management capacity, or within a housing capacity, to be able to better serve the survivors that we encounter. Because I know if you're here, you likely have the same mission and goal that we do, which is that any survivor who desires to exit should have the opportunity to do. And I know our placements team doesn't ever want to have a conversation of saying, I'm sorry, I know you want to exit, but there's nowhere for you to go, for you to get healing. And we've only had to have that conversation a couple of times. I know I've had it maybe twice in my time as placements, and Laura has done a much better job than I, in that she always finds a solution. And so I'm excited for you guys to get to hear from her. But Laura, could you briefly just describe your role at Safe House Project and how it intersects with in survivor services, and really what inspired you to work in this field?
Of course. So I'm the survivor support manager for Safe House Project. And as guests on the call may already know, our organization does many things to support survivors. We offer training online and in person for communities, healthcare, law enforcement, schools. We also facilitate the certification of programs across the nation. We distribute grants every year for programs to help fill those gaps that we're seeing. And we have these wonderful webinars. Thank you. But then we have the placements team, and that's where I can be found. We support the survivors on a much personal level. The placements team can be reached by calling our response line, by going to our website. At the bottom of the main page, click on Get Help Now, You complete the referral form, and whenever someone submits that form, it goes directly to everybody on the Safe House Project team. It's the placements team that actually responds to it. But what's great is that the entire team nationwide is notified that there's a new survivor that's reaching out for help. And the majority of the calls that we get are from the survivors themselves. However, we also receive calls from other national hotlines, local hotlines, hospitals, law enforcement, advocates. When we get on the phone with the survivor, we take time to get to know them. We understand what the need is. And then we have a pretty robust network of partners across the country. And we're able to filter our search to try and reach a Safe House partner that is a match, that has the resources that this individual needs. And we don't just find a bed. That would be easy. Instead, we work hard to connect them with resources that they need to heal and rebuild their lives, recognizing that healing involves way more than just finding a bed. We help facilitate those applications. We facilitate the intake interviews. Once accepted, Safe House Project organizes and funds the travel, and the support doesn't stop there. We then follow up with the survivor at 30 days, 60 days, 90 days to make sure that they're doing okay. And we do that in support of the survivor, but also in support of the program. And sometimes it's not a good fit. So that's okay, right? Then we work together and find out what went wrong, what we can change to place them again successfully. And I'm always telling survivors when I'm placing them and I'm putting them on a plane, I always say, write down my number on a piece of paper and know that I'm always a safe person to call. And if you don't like the program, that's okay. Don't run, right? Don't bolt and call me from a street corner and tell me that place was BS. Just stick with it, call me, and in a safe and controlled setting, we can talk through it and I can place you again. I do receive many calls after they bolted, right? I do receive those calls. I hated it. It was too controlling. It was too structured. They kept telling me what to do, and I left. And so then we're in an emergency situation that puts them in an unsafe situation. And that, of course, is not what we want. But either way, I always welcome their call. To answer I think you asked what inspired me. So to back up a bit, I've known Brittany Dunn, one of our co-founders, for a long time. We used to work together. And I've been following Safe House Project since the organization began. And I actually reached out one day to volunteer, and they ended up offering me a job. And I thought at first maybe Christy misunderstood my email, but it turns out that I did take the job in 2020. And I started in a completely different role. And when there was a need, I would help out with survivors, helping you, right? And everyone in the organization separately would come to me saying, hey, Laura, you're really good at this. And so I decided that I would agree to a job change. And I ended up working on placements completely, solely and completely. So I come from decades in the corporate world, but I've always wanted to find a place where I can use my talents to help those in most desperate needs. I talk to survivors all day long, and I'm so honored that they allowed me to be a part of their story. I'm not a trafficking survivor, so I can't say I know what it's like, but I can quiet my mind and my mouth. That's a challenge, but I can quiet myself to listen and really listen to them and understand what it is they need and what it is they're asking for. And I know I can't fix the problem, but what I can do is connect them with resources that can. And working with them brings me great joy. It's exhausting, but truly it is the most rewarding job I've ever had.
Thanks, Laura. And I think the way that I usually describe what Laura does and what the process is, like when Laura or the people who work for Laura under our placements team are looking to place a client, we're not looking at like, where is this survivor going to be in 30 days and what's the best option to get them to where they're going to be in 30 days. It's where does this person want to be in 5 years and which program can we partner with or which group of programs can we partner with to give them the best shot at being where they want to be 5 years from now. And Laura's done a really good job at that, but it doesn't come without challenges. And this is why we're really passionate about funding and supporting unique models and differing programs that are different and not all the same type of program, is because each survivor has a different healing journey. And what worked for me is not going to work for someone else. And so really ensuring that every survivor has an opportunity to enter into a program that addresses their unique needs, but that comes with barriers. And Laura, what are some of those harder to place clients? What are some of those unique barriers that are faced by clients?
Yes, our placements team, we serve all ages and all genders, and that includes survivors with animals, male survivors, trans survivors, pregnant survivors with children, those in active addiction, those with mental health challenges, minors. In fact, we have right now almost 20% of the active cases that we're working on right now are under the age of 18. Some of them are either in the care of a parent or the care of the state. Rarely actually do we have individuals that don't identify with at least one of those characteristics, but this is why we work so hard to get to know our programs and understand the environment that they offer. And if we're suggesting a safe house, it's because they've already been vetted. They've already been approved by leadership. They've already been tagged appropriately with such detail. Do they accept survivors that are on Suboxone? Or will the survivor have his or her own room? Or do they have resources to help those with severe mental health? Or, of course, the most asked question is, will they allow me to keep my phone? That's probably number one on the list. But I'd say still, even though these safe houses are excellent in the broad population that they serve, we still struggle with a couple challenges. And most recently, I'd say the biggest challenge seems to be survivors that are with a service dog or an emotional support animal. We do have safe houses that accept service dogs and emotional support animals, but they're often full. And we often struggle with travel arrangements now that the airlines have recently tightened up their rules and restrictions in regards to traveling with animals. Most of these survivors, they would rather stay in a life of abuse and neglect than leave their service animal. And I don't have a pet, but I can certainly be compassionate and understand that it would be like leaving a child or your best friend. So we're really working hard to expand our network in that respect. I'd say another challenge that we have is addiction. Someone or sometimes a survivor that needs to take a sidestep, right, before entering into a long-term program. For example, if the survivor is struggling with addiction, in many situations, when we're dealing with substance abuse, the survivor needs to enter into detox first. We help them to get to the right place so that they can detox in a safe environment. And then while in treatment, we continue to work with them and case management on the next steps. And then when the survivor's ready, we get them to a program. But it's not easy, right? Because when you've spent years numbing the pain with drugs and alcohol, you don't just lose the temptation after 30 days. So many times after the individual has started into their intensive therapy, they're at risk for leaving or relapsing or both, because they're still fresh and learning those tools on how to work through the pain of trauma without numbing it. So it's important for programs to understand addiction and how to help them through that struggle. I'm working with a survivor right now that I placed over a year ago, and she completed a long-term program, moved into a sober living environment, but recently relapsed. And I'm so glad she saved my number. Now we're trying to get her back into detox so that she can continue her journey. And she was feeling so defeated, but and she says, I can't believe I'm here in this place again and I have to start over. And I'm like, hey, just because you relapse doesn't mean that you have to cash in all of those days that you lived sober. You still get to celebrate those. I'm hopeful. She's still fresh and trying to get back on 2 feet, but we're going to work with her. And again, I'm so glad she saved my number so that we had the opportunity to do. And I'd say another challenge that we struggle with is working with survivors that experience severe mental health. Now, survivors that have an accurate diagnosis and a prescription, they're the fortunate ones, because that at least gives us a place to start with. It allows us to reach out to our partners with a clear picture and a clear need. But so many of the survivors that we work with are not as fortunate to have experienced a comprehensive psych eval. And as a result, they end up pushed from one program to another and ultimately completely misunderstood, right? And I placed a young woman about 3 or 4 times. She would call me. Every time she would call me, her story would contradict the previous story. And people just thought she was lying. Heck, maybe she was, right? But all I know is that for me and for our organizations, we believe our survivors. And if the story doesn't add up, we believe that's what she believes. And clearly it's coming from a place of trauma and pain, and therefore we want to help. And every time this survivor would get triggered and run from a program, she'd always end up calling me And so we ended up getting her into a program that really focuses on severe mental health. And she was able to get that psych eval and able to be diagnosed. She was diagnosed with DID as well as a few other things. She went into intensive therapy. She graduated from the program. She went back to school. She got a job. She's now engaged to be married. She sends us notes saying how great her life is and how much she appreciates us. And it just warms our heart to know that we didn't give up on her, and I'm so thankful that we didn't. There's a great need for more programs like that serve survivors with severe mental health. And I think if we had more options, we would have more success stories like that one. I'd say the last challenge I wanted to highlight is minors. And that's always been one of our biggest challenge. I'd say that over the last year, this is not only one of the biggest challenges, but it's the area where I've seen the most growth. But there's still room for much improvement. When we receive a call regarding a minor, we take time to understand who has custody. Can he or she leave the state? Is there a mental health diagnosis or substance abuse history? We take all that information and then we reach out to our partners. When the child is placed out of state, we work to secure the ICPC and get ready for travel. And to be honest, last year, I'd say the ICPC itself, that process, was my biggest challenge. Now, I was telling Christy yesterday, I'm like, it's not even on my top 5. We've mastered that. But the struggle is really, how do we keep the child safe in the waiting? And where can we keep this child during that application process and that ICPC process? Many times the child is sent home to a parent or a foster parent or to a shelter that's not secure, and then they elope. And this is where we lose the child. We've had quite a few go missing and then found, and then I was able to place them. And that's great success. However, I do have to note that we've had quite a few that we're still waiting to return. And I hope that they do. So what do we do with the child in the waiting? I'm not saying I want to lock them up. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying we need a temporary place in each state that is safe and secure, where they can start their healing while we're on the back end trying to get their placement secured.
Yeah. And in line with that, we've talked about there are some bureaucratical difficulties, like people not understanding ICPC or youth not being able to leave certain states in this capacity, but they could leave in this capacity and things like that. But when I've talked to you about those before, you mentioned to me that actually those aren't usually the biggest challenges, those pieces of red tape, that oftentimes what the biggest challenge is getting people on the other side of the red tape or who have the ability to change it or to file the paperwork to care. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yes. And I think that really the struggle of a successful placement and getting people to care and actually executing it from call to placement, the struggle is actually twofold, right? It's finding the program that specifically meets the need and balancing that need with availability. But then it's also, like you said, getting all of the players in line to do what they need to do, what they should do. We often end up in quicksand when it's completely necessary. You and I have worked on several cases where individuals who were in charge of a department chose to take a step back and say, not it. And then we're going around in circles trying to make something happen. And many times we were successful in making it happen. But the problem is, and the struggle is, that if people would just understand, whether it be the probation officers and the district attorney or the judge or the social worker or the hospital, I feel like what we struggle with is if they could just do their job and know that, especially with kids, if they could put their well-being before any other bureaucratic mess, our survivors would benefit greatly. But it's interesting, though, another struggle, not only getting through that, but like I said, it was twofold. The other struggle is sometimes what happens in trying to get a survivor to placement is to help the survivor understand the value of the options that we have before them. Like that, and this, of course, is not necessarily with kids, mostly with adults, but I think that we can speak to both. Really, that leap between hearing the option and accepting the option. Many survivors Don't make that leap. Many survivors call in a moment of courage, and after several calls back and forth, I think we average about 8 calls per survivor in every placement. We talk through the updates, we answer the questions, and that fear creeps in. The fear creeps in, and all of a sudden, the pain of the known, the pain of the now, even though they're being neglected and abused and used and starved, the known is less painful than the unknown. And it's interesting because Sarah on my team is working with a survivor right now, and she has a house, a car, a job, and she really just wants Sarah to promise her that it's going to be worth it. And we just can't do that, right? We can't talk. We talk to survivors all day long that have given up their material belongings, their pet, even temporary custody of their children. Some of those survivors are doing very well today. And I'll be honest with you, some of them, their stories didn't end so well. But it's not our job to sell them on the idea. It's our job to provide them the resources that are available to us. And it's our job to try and find them the help that they called in asking for. Ultimately, it's up to them to receive that help. And we recognize that the decision is difficult. For many of them, it's absolutely paralyzing.
That's really powerful. Thank you, Laura, and for that validation. And yeah, just a reminder that we have on our team that just because someone maybe chose in that moment to not receive the resources that were offered, that doesn't make it an unsuccessful placement or an unsuccessful call. It makes it perfectly successful if we were able to connect with them and offer them resources, regardless of where that conversation landed in their journey. And yeah, and that all of our services are obviously voluntary as well. When it's adults, it can be much more difficult, and that voluntary line gets fuzzy when we come to minors. Yeah. Can you kind of discuss some specific strategies that you found to be really effective in placing some of the more difficult demographics of survivors?
Yeah, I think mostly when dealing with the difficult placements that we have before us, first of all, we just try to stay open-minded. We don't make empty promises. However, we work very hard to place even those difficult cases. And in our first round of ideas, if they run dry, we discuss as a team and often leave those collaborations with new ideas and new people to call. We definitely lean on our partners to assist us. Our team is well aware of the areas and the resources where we're lacking. And we just work again and again, trying to expand our network to better serve those survivors. And then also, sometimes we just have to get creative. Doesn't sound like much of a strategy, but it is really, right? We might not be able to provide an environment that meets every need all at once. And so we brainstorm and offer different scenarios that'll still place them in a place of healing. But we have to have honest conversations with the survivor, because sometimes compromises have to be made. And that has to be a choice that they make, not us, right? We don't choose for them. We simply offer them the options and allow them to take that leap of courage. So they might have to stay in a domestic violence shelter until long-term is available. They might have to remain in an emergency shelter in state until their active warrant is resolved and they can leave the state. They might have to surrender their pet or their car or their house. They might have to enter into behavioral health to stabilize and then find resources that they need. And they might need to give up temporary custody of their children so that they could get healing. These are choices, like I said, we can't make for them. So we just continue to stay open-minded, get creative, and provide them options, and ultimately the choice is theirs.
Yeah.
Because if it's not theirs, right, we can in situations say, oh, you should do this. I'm going to buy you a plane ticket. I'm going to send you off to this safe house. And if we're the ones doing all the talking, if we're the ones doing all of the decision making, it's not going to be a successful placement. They're going to end up leaving because we ultimately did not spend time to hear them, and not only hear the need that they are sharing with us, but hear the obstacles that they are still trying to get over. And that could be so many things, but it has to be in their time, not ours.
Yeah. Thanks, Laura. And you touched on partnerships with other organizations, but how important are those partnerships and collaboration, especially when placing difficult to place clients?
Oh, absolutely. Building partnerships is so important. We can't do this alone, nor do we intend to, right? We have strong partnerships with our safe houses, but also with hospitals and law enforcement. We don't need to be the expert in the field. I think we just need to know the expert to call.
Yeah. Can you give some examples of successful collaboration and their impact on some specific groups of hard to serve demographics?
Absolutely. We have several partnerships with large healthcare networks, which has proven to be hugely successful in our placement process. One in North Carolina, which I'd love to highlight, is Atrium Health in Charlotte. They've dedicated staff working specifically on trafficking cases. Their entire hospital staff is required to complete our HOPE training and how to spot and report trafficking. And this year alone, we've received over 20 referrals from this hospital. 17 of them are minors. And the staff is instructed to alert Safe House Project when a trafficking case is confirmed. We work with the hospital staff, social workers, law enforcement, child services, and/or parents. We receive a significant amount of support from Present Age Ministries, who joins the Atrium team on every single case. We meet weekly to review each active case. And then when the individual is placed, we organize the transportation, because all the trafficking victims that go through this one certain team, the communication is very effective and survivors never get lost in the system. So the partnerships that we have with larger healthcare networks have proven to be huge. Another partnership that has proven to be beneficial in our placements is partnering with attorneys nationwide, especially those that specialize in immigration. When we're working with an individual that needs advisement on immigration, we now have people to turn to. And as the immigration process is complicated and overwhelming, and I've tried to educate myself several times, and I end up walking away with more questions than I have answers. And our team has completed a comprehensive training on the topic. However, that doesn't mean that we're equipped to advise someone regarding their immigration status. In fact, it would be unlawful for us to do so. Instead, we connect with pro bono attorneys that could advise the survivor. So often the survivor is eligible for benefits, and this individual doesn't even know it. And so for something so important as immigration, or really any important legal matter, we just stay in our own lane. And the best way to help the survivors is to connect them with that expert instead of pretending to be one. And I'd say the last partnership that I have found, going back to minors, is with child services. The child services partnerships that we have expanded greatly. And these social workers are, I always say this, they're overworked and underpaid. And oftentimes they're viewed as not caring and overlooking the needs of the kids. But from what I have found, and I'm sure there are those out there, but from what I have found, the need is not a more caring individual, but the need is more resources and more time. And so I tell them, let me do the hard work, right? Let me do the search. Let me do the applications. Let me work on the travel logistics. Instead of stepping on each other's toes, we've improved our communication and effectiveness. And for one example, I partnered with social services, child services, I know they call it different in each state, on one placement that we have a 15-year-old girl that has an IQ of 55. And so her story of abuse and neglect is disgusting. Mom no longer has custody. Dad's in prison. She's been in and out of juvenile detention, in and out of psychiatric facilities. We started working together a few months ago to find a safe house for her. And even though I have plenty of open beds for kids, we weren't able to find one program that would accept a child with an IQ under 70. And so the programs that we then started looking at were those that were focused for youth with intellectual disabilities, which were not trafficking specific. And she wasn't accepted to those either because of her highly sexualized behavior and aggression, which we all know came from the trauma of her trafficking. And so we were really stuck on what environment we could help this child find, and the social workers just refused to give up. And so we continued to meet and brainstorm, and we were able to work together to find a therapeutic foster family for this child, which in the end turns out to be the best scenario. Because in this environment, she's able to get individualized attention from a loving family. And then Safe House Project, we've offered to bring in those wraparound services for her to address the trauma of trafficking. So I'm certainly thankful for those partnerships that we've made in child services. And I always encourage them to save me on their speed dial.
Yeah, you've given quite a few examples, but do you have any other examples of really successful experiences that highlighted some of how these barriers are able to be overcome that you want to share?
Yeah, I have about 27. All right, maybe I'll reduce that and go for maybe 3 or 4. Yeah, I have so many. It was hard to pick. I'm like, which ones am I going to highlight? I changed my mind about 27 times. But one case that I wanted to share with you guys, which definitely makes me smile, is a 16-year-old that we worked with that was trafficked by a family member. She had a pretty intense drug addiction. Mom was not safe. Dad no longer wanted anything to do with her. She was placed in several foster homes that either ended with her running or getting kicked out for aggression or drug use. She liked the attention from older men and liked the gifts that they gave her in exchange for doing what they asked. And she was placed in several safe homes and eloped from each one of them. And one day something changed. After getting beat up by the guy that thought that he loved her and then faced the hard truth that dad no longer wanted her, she was picked up by law enforcement and taken to a hospital and found herself in a place of willingness to accept help. And so we placed her in a program in a different state. She entered into the program several years behind in school. She even told me one of her teachers told her that she would never finish school because she wasn't high school graduate material. And today she not only finished high school, but she graduated from that program. She now lives in transitional housing and she has a job, and she's starting college this fall and to pursue a nursing degree. And I just got chills. I'm
Yeah,
thrilled.
me
Right?
too.
Thrilled. Beautiful, beautiful. Another case which makes me laugh, and my team member Sarah is going to giggle on this one. So Sarah actually worked with this survivor, I think her very first week on the job. And this survivor had just turned 18 when she called. She was abandoned by her family at the age of 14. She was pregnant with her third child. The other two are now in the care of social services. She was in the hospital after being severely beaten by John. She was homeless and addicted to meth. And Sarah was able to find her temporary shelter when she was released. And I'll never forget this day. As this young girl was leaving the hospital, Sarah kept calling Ubers to get her to that temporary shelter. And this young girl stood at the entrance of the hospital and watched 4 Ubers drive up and drive away. She just could not muster up the courage to get in the car with a stranger, even though the driver was female. But finally, Sarah talked her through it several times, talked her through it. She got the courage to get into the shelter. And while she was in that temporary shelter, Sarah called 37 programs and found a safe house that focuses on caring for pregnant survivors that struggle with addiction. And the survivor had the baby, and then we placed her in another, but Sarah placed her in another program that was specific to survivors with young children. And she still struggles. She struggles with anger. She struggles with temptation to use. She occasionally blows up Sarah's phone during a tantrum. But knowing her history of childhood trafficking and abuse and neglect and abandonment, it's clear that she struggles to trust. So we're glad that she trusts us, right? We're glad that she considers Sarah a safe place to vent. Sarah lovingly calls her an equal mix of a cinnamon roll and a firecracker. And from what I know from this young girl, that seems to be pretty darn accurate. But another survivor story that I'd love to share, one that just so dear to me, a 52-year-old survivor. She has been trafficked for decades. She struggles significantly with addiction. In addiction is where that's what led to her trafficking. She started off with just recreational use of pot and drinking on the weekends. And years later, she found herself with a meth habit that had completely consumed her. And she lost her job, her home, her family. She was offered a place to stay by someone that she thought was a kind acquaintance, right? And she spent 20 years being trafficked out of a rundown house in exchange for drugs and alcohol. And a local church actually ministered to her on the street one day. And after several attempts, they were able to convince her to get help. And that's when we started working with her. And we got her into detox. and then a few months of sober living environment. We placed her 4 times. She kept leaving each placement and she would get on the phone and yell at me and tell me how awful it was and they had too many rules. But this last placement, something stuck and it's really working for her. And so she still struggles, but she's been able to stick with it. And next week she's moving into transitional housing. She already has a job lined up at the CVS, and I talked to her this week. She's excited and she's nervous. And the program that she's in right now is going to stick with her and remain with her to provide support. And she's also active in a 12-step recovery program that provides her community and support. So I'm really excited to stay in touch with her and see what the future holds for her.
Yeah. Thanks, Laura. And we're going to transition to question and answer in a second, but I just wanted to point out, I think a lot of us have probably heard that statistic. I think it comes from a domestic violence statistic, but there's a number that gets thrown around saying that it usually takes survivors like 7 to 9 times of attempting to leave before they leave. And for us, we're always trying to pose the question or have the discourse within our team, is that because of the fear of change seems so great? Or is that because on times 1 through 6, they weren't met with services that could address the need of where they were right now? And like I look back at my experience and know that it was probably 7 or 8 or 9 time when I finally left. And for me, it was probably a combination of those things, but certainly would have left maybe on time 3 or time 4 if there had been the opportunity to not give up temporary custody of my kids, if there had been the opportunity to not have some of the barriers to begin with. And that's really a big part of what drives us, is if we can meet at time 1 and provide that what is needed at time 1, maybe we don't have to wait until time 7 to have someone exit. And so that's a big part of what we do as well. And to do that, and we're just going to spend like a minute or two here, and then we're going to open up for question and answer. But what are some kind of future goals for your team to fill some of the gaps that you're still the big challenges that you're still encountering when it comes to appropriately placing survivors?
Yeah, I would just say continuing to communicate the need, continuing to offer training to the community and the hospitals and to law enforcement. Safe houses are seeing the need to expand their resources to serve a broader population. And this is the focus of our grant distribution. We support our programs by helping them financially open doors and add beds. And our leadership is listens, and they listen to me and they listen to the entire placements team. And when we tell them where the gaps are, they go out and do the hard work, finding and providing us the support that we need. And sometimes the support we need is just answering the phone. And you can often find our CEO answering the phone. When she says, "Can I help?" Sarah and I are like, "Yes, you can." And we give her a list of numbers and she calls them. And so she jumps in to walk alongside our survivors because she knows that it's the heartbeat of what we do. So I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, I am too. And yeah, that is our placements data, the survivors that we serve inform everything that we do as an organization. It's not like in a silo, in isolated. Our placements data determines certifications or priority for certifications. It determines priority for funding through the grant process. It determines how we interact with our donors and what we're funding internally as far as additional staff placements. And yeah, so we do collect data from everything that Laura does as well. And we shared some of that a couple of months ago in our landscape analysis. And I know there's a question about it here as well. So we'll get into that in a minute. But I want to address some of the questions that have come up. Samantha had a situation recently where they had a physically handicapped survivor reach out to us. And we have had many, especially, yeah, we have had many. And
That.
yes, we've done that. And this specific survivor that they worked with had a feeding tube, was in a wheelchair, but she was self-sufficient. This is due to her trafficking, and they couldn't find a placement for her specifically because of those disabilities, the need for weekly deliveries to her IV, not being handicap accessible. Is that something that you have found to be a barrier?
Yes, and we have placed, as you touched on, we've placed several individuals that have some level of physical disability. And I have even placed an individual on a feeding tube. What we try to do is we try to look at what the true need is, right? And so we can go out and ideally we would get this individual into a safe house, and this individual would not only be able to get all of the resources that this safe house has to offer, but would be able to be served in a respectful way to her disability. And if we don't find, that's when we get creative. So in the previous cases that I have had, we've done all sorts of different things. Like we've found temporary housing for physically disabled with access to medical care, and then wraparound services for the trauma therapy to address the pain of the trafficking, right? And then I had another person on a feeding tube, and the reason why the feeding tube was in is because she had struggled for many years with an eating disorder. So what we did, we realized that was still top on her list of struggles. And so what we did was we worked with a partner that focuses on that. And we helped move the individual into a long-term program to focus on the eating disorder, knowing that we're still here walking alongside her. But once she can tackle that, then we're going to move her into, she's still there, then we're going to move her into a safe house. So you can always reach out to me directly. And I always welcome the opportunity to get on the phone and brainstorm about ideas. And this is what has worked in the past. This is what hasn't. This is what's available. This is what's not. This is what the survivor is willing to do. And this is what the survivor is not willing to do. And we can talk through that, but we could definitely find an option, I'm sure.
Thanks, Laura. This next question was wondering if we've had any analysis of the feedback given from those survivors who have needed to find a new placement after initially being placed, and if we've seen any trends. And I know that's something that we're only within the last year starting to track and analyze, but yeah, have we been able to illuminate trends from that yet?
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't have that number in front of me, and I bet I could get it quickly. But just from memory of dealing with the survivors every day, I can't pull out one reason. I'm sure that in our data, one reason will rise to the top, but it's so many things. It has to do with what you were touching on earlier, Alia, is that it's two things. It's, are they in a place where they're ready to receive help, and are they in the right place to give them the resources that they need? And it's not always a right fit, right? Finding the right fit, even as our network grows, is still one of our biggest challenges. And
Yeah.
so what we do is we just try to improve on that. But yeah, I would think that it's a mix of the person not being ready and the safe house not offering the survivors that can meet their need in that moment, right? And as we know, their needs change sometimes daily, but mostly just in the stages of their recovery.
One thing I have noticed on the flip side of that is
Mm.
that some of those programs that tend to have survivors, that when we place a survivor there where and the survivor stays, have more training than others, and especially a lot of training on that de-escalation piece.
Oh,
That
right.
those Yeah, those programs that have had really invested in de-escalation training for their staff have had more survivors who have been able to stay for the long haul.
Absolutely. And being honest in the forefront of what these safe houses can do, and being transparent about what they are not necessarily trained or skilled at, is important, because a lot of times people will want to check all of the boxes. Oh, I take trans survivors because I wanted to check that box. That's funny. I've called you 7 times and every time you said no. So just be honest when you're filling out those forms to say, this is what we do and this is what we don't do, because that just sets you up for failure. If you say you're skilled in de-escalation or severe mental health, and I send you someone and it ends up to go south, it just hurts everybody. So absolutely, I think that training is important.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. And one question that we got was that this person has encountered little to no safe houses who accept males.
Hmm.
Um, how many options have you been able to find for them?
We have very few, but we also have very few males that call in. We do have great options though. And I have placed males over the last year. So I would say if you reach out to me directly, we can work on that. There definitely are options. Like I said, not as many as there are women, but stats will show that there's not as many male survivors as women. And I think that there's still a gap in the offering of services, but we can certainly find something for sure.
Yeah, that there's been a gap and there aren't as many different types of offerings like we have with women where we're able to be like so specific in the type
Right.
of care that they receive.
That's
But
true.
I know that since you've taken over this role, we haven't had to say to a male or a trans survivor who were the genders that were more difficult to place, we don't have a place to you for you.
Correct.
Yeah,
Correct.
which
We have
is
not. The only male survivor that I could not place, it was because he was in the middle of cancer treatment and he needed to stay local. And I couldn't find what he needed locally. And it was clearly most important that he remain and get his medical treatment first. And so the thought is, okay, you need to stay. Let's make sure you have the basic needs in life and make sure that you have your treatment, but that has to come first. So yeah, things in life come in and throw us curveballs, but for the most part, yeah, we can place males.
yeah. And I'm going to answer these next two questions because they're vetting and certification related. And I don't want to turn this into a certification call, but I know that's a question, and we're happy to have these questions on offline. I'll put my email in the chat so that you can do that. But essentially, we have two different things. We have our vetting and our placement. All programs that receive clients from our placement line will have had to have gone through vetting, not necessarily certification. Certification, we have a deeper insight into the programs, and so we feel most comfortable placing there because we know them so well. But the majority of the programs that we place into are vetted, meaning that they've had a call with me or with Laura. Now it's all with me, where we've really assessed not so much the quality, but the quantity of services, the services provided, and that there are no big glaring red flags before we place a survivor. And that's, we don't charge for that. That's a 30-minute call with me to be able to do that so we can tell the survivor, I've spoken to them, I know that this is what they offer, and this is a safe space for you. Certification is another venture entirely. There are quite a few certified programs actually on this call right now, and it is a full accrediting process. It can take 3 to 6 months. It requires an application, a site visit by a lived experience expert and another member of our certification team. We do very deep dive into sustainability, into programming, into training, really into the nuts and bolts of this program, what their core building blocks of that program are, how their staff is being supported, how their survivors are being supported, and we really understand it very deeply. And then we there are scaled out on if they reach certification on a bronze, silver, or gold level, along with highlighting if they have an economic empowerment or if they have a specialized service, if they do take survivors that maybe need cancer treatment or are pregnant or parenting and things like that as well. And certification for us, while it isn't like an absolute priority that we place somebody in a certified program, we certainly feel the most comfortable placing in a certified program because we know them so much more deeply. And they have gone through such a deep dive. And so we'll place there when appropriate. And then for funding, again, it's the same thing. At this point, maybe if a few years from now, this will probably change where certified program get absolute priority in funding. Right now, that's not the case. But we do, again, like we know these programs better. We already know their sustainability. We know the quality of care they're giving their clients. And that does come into play when we fund a program as well. And I am happy to give more information if your specific organization is interested in certification. You can reach out to me directly. My email is just alia@safehouseproject.org. And then just the question is, do we have any resources where you can find how many emergency houses or beds are available in our area? Yes, Laura. Laura is your resource to do that.
Yeah.
We don't have a place on our website where you can search and do that. That's Laura's job, is to help you do that. And so she can certainly make connections or make that phone call with you or for you so that you can continue to serve the clients that you're doing, because I know that is a huge lift when you're trying to actively de-escalate and actively provide case management and de-escalation and services and care and therapeutic care to a client. Laura can take that piece off of your plate to be able to run in the lane that she specializes in. But Laura, I just want to thank you for coming on. I know people get to see my face so often, they get to see Christy's, and we don't get to see Laura, who is far be it probably the hardest working member of our team, and her team is. And so I'm glad that I got to be able to bring her forefront for you all to get to know her a little bit better and know how she can be a resource to you and the clients that you serve. And I'm grateful that you all are here. Next month, we're going to be meeting on trauma-informed faith-based care with some of our partner programs. I hope y'all have an excellent Friday and that you enjoy your weekend. Thanks.